Medically, this newborn baby stood no chance of survival. But she lived because a doctor had faith in her mother's feelings. A paralyzed cellist can play again, even though this seemed medically impossible. He no longer needs a wheelchair because he learnt to draw on the power of his internal images. Doctors lay hands on patients and are applying more and more traditional methods. Are ancient empirical medicine and modern science together solving the secret of healing powers? For centuries, scientists regarded man as a biological machine. By examining smaller and smaller parts of the human body, they hoped to understand the secrets of sickness and healing. The empirical medicine of all civilizations, however, always placed the emphasis on the whole, on the unity of body and soul. Both approaches enjoyed significant success. Time and again, however, they reached their limits. Pioneering discoveries by neuroscientists are now helping to open the door towards cooperation, and they are directing the spotlight on unusual stories of healing. When she and her husband visited Frankfurt am Main University Hospital in Germany, Ursula Mannweiler was 6 months pregnant. A year previously, she'd miscarried after 7 months, and this time too, her condition was giving cause for concern. The results of the examination were gloomy. The embryo was far too small. It had apparently stopped growing several weeks previously. And Professor Frank Löwen found no amniotic fluid in the womb. As he's showing the patient here, the blood flow in the umbilical cord was really poor. The blood was actually flowing back. So hardly any nutrition or oxygen was reaching the child from the placenta.
The findings we obtained back then were a certain indication that the child stood no chance of survival. It was a terrible situation for the patient. She'd so much wanted to avoid experiencing something like that a second time, and not one examination after her first pregnancy had shown that she faced an increased risk. Nevertheless, the situation had repeated itself.
Despite the virtual pointlessness in view of the medical evidence, Professor Löwen agreed to the patient's request to try glucose infusion therapy. He knew that the belief in healing can trigger off physical changes.
I'd been pregnant once before, but my child was stillborn. The embryo was undernourished and we'd tried back then to save it with glucose. But it died in the 27th week of pregnancy and I had to give birth to it. When you've experienced something like that, you don't give up easily. I wanted to fight for my second baby, little Mira, just like I'd fought for my first. Any mother would.
The infusion had to run continuously day and night. Ursula Mannweiler could see on the faces of the nurses how little chance they thought she had of saving her baby. But with her husband's support, she took up the fight, disputing anyone who doubted her child's chances of survival. But when the medical findings failed to show any improvement, an inner conflict arose in her.
I lay in my little room shut off from the world outside. For 2 days, lying there with nothing happening. I was in a rage. I shouted at God. He'd already taken one child. Why did he need a second one? Well, I wasn't going to give it him. I sobbed and sobbed, bawling out all my anger.
Ja, hab richtig geheult, wie ein Schlosshund. Hab alles rausgeschrien.
Then suddenly, after 1 or 2 days, the results improved.
Surprisingly, after only a week, the values for the umbilical cord were normal. As you can see here, the blood circulation in the child's brain was also normal, as was the blood flow here in the heart.
For Professor Löwen, it was an almost miraculous development. But how much damage had the embryo sustained? Would the child be seriously disabled? The parents were prepared to take the risk. Finally, Mira was born. Weighing just 600 grams, she was tiny, but she was alive. And apart from her size, she had developed perfectly normally without any trace of disability. So what had been the secret of her recovery? What role did her mother play? Her hopes, her willingness to fight, her inner conflict? Mira was 5 years old when these pictures were taken, a healthy, highly intelligent child, and her story has changed Frank Löwen's attitude.
From a purely medical point of view, you'd have to say that Mira's story is impossible. On the other hand, we are forced to admit that there are so many factors whose influence still exceeds our knowledge. We have no idea what effect the psyche, hopes and desires, the will, and a positive attitude to life have, what they trigger off in the body and the mind. And as long as we are in the dark, we simply must concede that they do have an effect.
One thing is certain, the close contact between mother and child is of life-preserving importance. This is immediately visible in the neonatal intensive care unit. Touch and closeness improve a baby's physical condition, eliminate stress symptoms and thus help to prevent sickness. Displays of love and tenderness have an immediate effect and are of lifelong importance. Thanks to ultrasound, this deep bond can be seen long before birth. The baby reacts to speech and music, to the mother's emotions and experiences. Can an internal debate also influence physical parameters? Neuroscientists in the United States have scanned the brains of people who can be regarded as specialists in internal dialogue, because that is precisely what monks and nuns practice all their lives. In deep contemplation, the activity of the brain can shift gradually into the frontal region, a sign of great attentiveness. The consciousness pinpoints a wish or a goal just like a searchlight. At the same time, fears and concerns lose their meaning. According to physician and neurobiologist Professor Tobias Esch, this applies to Buddhist meditation and to meditative prayer.
Prayer can definitely reduce stress. Many studies carried out by us and by other scientists worldwide show that prayer triggers off relaxation responses in the brain. To be more precise, the activation of certain centers in the brain also activates a relaxation mechanism, in the final analysis throughout the entire body. This relaxation mechanism is a physiological antagonist of the stress response. So all the factors we associate with stress, the urge to fight or run away, a pounding heart, fast and shallow breathing, sweating, what stress does to us can be countered on a physiological level by this relaxation response. And this self-same relaxation response can be triggered off by prayer.
What happens in the brain and in the body when thoughts, desires and emotions change? How do such changes manifest themselves biologically? The science of psychoneuroimmunology has an answer. The cells in the brain and in the rest of the body produce messenger substances with which they provide information on their state. These information molecules dock on to compatible receptors which provide access to the interior of a cell. The receptors alter their activity and provide information on this with messenger substances of their own. Fertile exchange takes place throughout the body as all levels strive to maintain the vital balance. Thoughts and emotions trigger off major changes in the body, and these generate new feelings and new thoughts. The brain, the glands, and the immune system are indissolubly interlinked. A surgeon's practice in Aachen. For 11 months, Dr. Kai Krugel has been treating a patient who came to him after an operation. The wound in her groin had not healed. Yasmin Yousefi insisted on a conservative form of treatment. On no account did she wish to go back into hospital. Dr. Krugel had treated the problem in line with the rules of wound management, as it's known, but he'd failed to achieve any permanent success.
The wound would improve and then deteriorate. Sometimes it was completely open again. I was baffled. In the end, we wanted to have the patient hospitalized for surgical reassessment to find out whether there was some factor in the depths of the abdominal wall preventing the wound from healing.
Yasmin consulted Georg Lometz, who'd been her general practitioner for many years. He knew that as a child in Iran, she had suffered a traumatic wartime experience. She'd been buried in a hospital building that had collapsed. Ever since then, she had had a panic fear of hospitals. But medically, the situation was quite clear. If a wound ultimately fails to heal, the only course open is revision surgery.
There was no way I was prepared to go back into hospital. Firstly, I had had bad experiences of hospitals as a child. And secondly, I'd been a patient of Dr. Lometz's for a long time and trusted him completely. I believed there was something special about him. He had always helped me to regain my health in the past.
Was mir jetzt auch immer geholfen hat, dann gesund zu werden.
Georg Lometz had long been interested in complementary medicine. He'd only recently learned an ancient form of treatment, the laying on of hands. Yasmin was the first patient on whom he'd tried out his newfound skills, despite being filled with inner doubt. Yasmin had confirmed in writing that she refused to be hospitalized and took full personal responsibility for her decision. But can this simple gesture of care and attention influence the network of body and soul and help a wound to close?
Nach der dritten Behandlung
I still remember almost exactly how, immediately after the third session, I had the feeling that the treatment was going to work. It was like a switch being flipped. From then on, I was certain that I'd get better.
The night after treatment, Yasmin dreamt of the mortal fear she had experienced in hospital in Iran, but she awoke with the feeling that now everything was going to be all right. 3 days later, to her doctor's surprise, the wound had completely closed.
Yes, I was amazed. I'd never have thought that the wound could heal so quickly. You must remember that for 11 months, every possible treatment had been tried out, but with no success. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I lay hands on the patient, and by Monday, the wound had closed completely. It was like a miracle. When the patient was sent back to me for a checkup, I was stunned. The wound had healed. Scar formation was stable. I just couldn't explain it, but we were happy. The treatment had been a success, and whoever heals proves themselves right.
Georg Lometz has integrated the method into his everyday practice, modern medicine combined with the ancient art of healing. Dominik Polonsky, a young Polish cellist of international repute, was suffering from a life-threatening brain tumour. He'd twice had surgery, but had kept on playing even though he could hardly feel his left arm. Then he was told by doctors that the tumour in his head was still growing. Operations 3 and 4 took place in quick succession. In June 2004, Dominik Polonsky lost a quarter of his brain.
After the fourth operation, I woke up and felt that this time something hadn't gone according to plan. I was horrified. I couldn't feel half my body.
Doctors gave Dominic little hope of recovery. He lay in hospital in despair. Using his healthy hand, he would insert a CD into the player he always had with him and listen throughout those long nights to his favourite piece of music, the Well-Tempered Clavier by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Wizytacja lekarzy przyszła rano, stanęła przy moim łóżku.
The doctors did their rounds in the mornings. One day, when they arrived at my bed, I looked at them and suddenly felt that I could move my leg. I'd never tried that before. But when they asked how I felt, I knew my leg.
Months of daily exercise followed, but all Dominic managed to do was move painstakingly forward with the help of a special four-legged stick. Then, by chance, he was given the address of a psychologist in Germany. Martin Busch combines two approaches: hypnosis, which is aimed at changing a patient's inner attitude, and the Feldenkrais method, a special system for improving movement.
Du kannst spüren, wie viel Bewegung im Hüftgelenk jetzt ist. Und wann dann.
But how can internal images and physical exercises influence something as serious as cancer?
Wenn es gelingt, auf der
On the physical side, if an approach can be adopted which makes it directly noticeable that something is changing, and if at the same time there is a possibility of activating an inner orientation towards what one is trying to achieve, then a major change can occur very quickly, sometimes at astonishing speed.
manchmal sehr verblüffend eine große Veränderung stattfinden. Wenn du jetzt hier den Spielraum spürst und vergleichst, wann dein Becken beginnt.
Is it the special state between sleeping and waking that provides the scope for change? Is it only in this way that new paths in the brain become visible?
Wie ist das Verhältnis jetzt?
Connection between both legs.
Das heißt, jetzt hast du eine Verbindung zwischen beiden. Okay. Die Tatsache, dass Dominik
The first time Dominic and I met, we just had a chat. There was very little touching involved. Yet afterwards, he was able, at my request, to stand up and walk, without even noticing that he wasn't using a stick. This shows that he was focused on what he wanted, and one of the most important things to him was to be able to walk.
wo hin will, und eins vom Wichtigsten war das Gehen können.
In other words, he'd activated this capability because the inner balance between his physical possibilities and his orientation had been re-established.
Wie wäre es, wenn du aus dieser Steh-Trance in eine Geh-Trance gehen würdest? Magst du probieren?
It took many hours of treatment before Dominic was able to permanently replace the connections in his brain that had been lost. In a light trance, the bonds between body and mind become blurred. These bounds don't actually exist, but knowing this, researchers discovered, is not sufficient. What matters is experiencing it.
Das war jetzt ganz neu in deinem Rücken. Hast du das gespürt? Das war wie Ballett.
The success of this kind of treatment also depends on a trusting relationship between those involved.
Und immer alle Zeit. Jawohl, das ist es, schau. Das ist es. Hey. Ja, perfekt.
What exactly took place in Dominic's head when he again learned how to walk? After all, a quarter of his brain was now missing. Recent findings have shown that the brain does indeed possess the ability to continue developing well into old age. Every new skill strengthens the connections between the neurons. More information flows and the nerve cells are able to interlink more and more. When a person neglects a capability, the place it occupied is reallocated by the brain to other tasks. Experiences and thoughts, especially if they involve movement and emotions, lead to plastic changes, and this can have an effect on many diseases. But if this balance has been lost, how can it be regained? What state do body and mind have to be in for the unexpected to become possible? Scientists compare this special position with a pendulum which pauses at its apex. It is totally at rest, yet at the same time has maximum energy potential. In this phase, tiny impulses are sufficient to push the pendulum in either direction. Before Dominik Polonsky began his treatment in Germany, a scan had revealed 2 new tumours in his brain. Both were inoperable. He was, doctors said, beyond treatment. So he began to fight the tumour with a mental image.
I imagined the tumour to be a rock. Every night, using different tools, I tried to pulverize and destroy it, but nothing happened. Everything stayed the way it was. Martin then explained that the only way for the situation to really change was for the diseased cells to be replaced by healthy ones.
Wenn ich einen Tumor bekämpfe, steht der Tumor im Mittelpunkt meines
When a person combats a tumour, the tumour is at the very centre of their being. The focus is always on it. So I suggested something different to Dominik. I offered him my way of looking at the situation. Why, I asked, shouldn't healthy cells be able to divide more quickly? Why shouldn't healthy cells be able to develop their strength better than diseased cells?
nicht besser entfalten können als Kranke. So wenn du deine Orientierung veränderst vom Kampf gegen die kranken Zellen.
If you change your orientation from fighting the diseased cells to focusing on your healthy cells with all their vitality, dividing quickly and taking up the space once occupied by disease cells, then if the healthy cells really do divide more quickly and occupy this space, there will be no room for the diseased cells.
Dominik worked tirelessly with the new image, just like, as a musician, he had improved his playing by practicing night and day. There are no concrete scientific findings on the precise effect of this kind of visualization, but Dominik believed firmly in his symbolic image. So is it possible in this way for a person to bring about a decisive change in their inner attitude? 5 weeks later, the next checkup.
Afterwards, I remember, a doctor who'd always been very kind came up to me, looked at my test results and began to weep. I've had it, I thought. But then he told me that the tumour had gone. He couldn't explain it, he said. But he was so happy for me. He rang my family and told them to come and collect me so that I could spend Christmas at home.
The secret of healing is still a mystery, but more and more scientists feel they are on the way to finding the answer. It could lie in a state of openness which characterizes all living systems. How they behave depends on far more factors than we can take stock of. They cannot be calculated, as in the case of a machine, says brain researcher Professor Gerald Hüther.
We tend to think of the human brain and the human body functioning like a machine. But even a complex machine cannot form an inner order which controls everything. That is the role played by these mental images, these internal perceptions, these patterns which are developed in the brain and help time and again to hold together things which, according to the laws of physics and chemistry, ought to fly apart. That is their great achievement, and it's why mental images exist.
Cellist Dominik Polonsky has learned how important these mental images can be. Gerald Hüther's findings indicate that the brainstem contains all information regarding our health, but the path to it can be blocked by thoughts and perceptions. In everyday life, rational consciousness, the level of basic logic, prevails. Everything seems calculable. Intuition has no place here. Below this level, however, lie hidden areas of great power, like the belief in a greater whole. It is here that trust and hope can arise, but also the understanding that not everything the intellect wishes can actually be realized. Even deeper lies the prehistoric level. Hidden in its ancient images is intuitive knowledge of healing, says Professor Tobias Esch, a specialist in preventive medicine.
We are discovering rituals from eons ago which already helped our Stone Age ancestors, especially when times were hard. Through the looking glass of modern medicine, so to speak, we are only slowly starting to peer into the past and rediscover things. And it is indeed inevitable that science should suddenly confirm effects that were actually known about thousands of years ago.
Was this ancient knowledge preserved because it proved useful again and again, standing the test of time? What is certain is that many patients find it a valuable supplement. Dominik Polonsky has won fresh time. How his tale will end is still uncertain. But he has found his way back to music. He obtained a doctorate in musicology. He trains young cellists. And he has appeared on stage again as a soloist, performing a cello concerto for one hand, specially composed for him and broadcast live on Polish radio. Every medical history is distinct. No one can predict what will happen, even though today much can be explained scientifically. But how Ursula Mannweiler gave her daughter the will to live will probably forever remain a mystery. However, her story and that of many other patients shows that medicine can only benefit if technological progress is combined with empathy and ancient knowledge with new findings.